You think your house is the safest place on earth? Wait until you hear what was hiding under these stairs. 4 real basement encounters. 4 nights where ordinary routines turned into something that didn't quite make sense, and never stopped making sense. The first one, I went downstairs to do laundry and found a man crouched behind a folding table. The lights went out. I got dragged. The pounding at the door almost tore the hinges off. The second, I was 14, alone with the house to myself. Tapping moved around the siding, ended at the basement window. My phone caught a grainy figure beneath glass that should have been on the inside. The third, a typical teen hangout in a finished basement. Music, cheap pizza, a cat that knew when something was wrong. A foam football rolled out of a storage room. No footprints, no signs of entry. The fourth, I was 9, playing games in a windowless laundry room. I heard my mother call from downstairs. Only the voice came from the boiler room. A silhouette stood in the dark. Years later, a family name surfaced, and the explanations stopped adding up. If you love being creeped out, hit subscribe. This is the kind of stuff you don't want to forget. It began as the kind of Saturday night that makes you feel like an adult. I had my own place, a little duplex with a finished basement, washer, dryer, a folding table shoved against a cinderblock wall, yellow bulbs that always flickered a little, like they were tired. I had lived there a few months and convinced myself I knew every creak the house made. I went down to fold a load. I remember thinking the basement smelled like detergent and old concrete. The lights were on. That was the first thing I noticed. Someone had left them on when no one was supposed to be down there. It felt off in the same way that a wrong song on your playlist feels wrong. Small, nagging, but fixable. Then I saw him. He was crouched behind the folding table like he had been waiting or hiding. He wasn't standing up. His posture was low. The whole thing was too casual to be a robber hammering a door. He had the look of someone who planned on staying. He didn't move his head at first. He just sat there, low to the ground, hands near his knees. I froze. "Hey," I said. My voice came out thin. The first instinct is always to ask for an explanation. I don't know why. Maybe I needed confirmation that I wasn't hallucinating the wrongness of the moment. He bolted. He moved like a sound you can feel, a rush, a scrape across concrete. He didn't run toward the stairs. He ran deeper into the partitioned area of the basement. There were low ceilings and narrow corridors, a door that led to a storage room and another door that led to the garage. The layout made the place feel like a little maze. Then the lights went out. 1 second the bulbs hummed their tired song. The next, the basement collapsed into a flat, choking dark. I staggered, hands reaching for the stairs. My foot caught on the edge of the bottom step. I tripped, fell forward. When your body falls and your brain doesn't have time to send the stop signal, your limbs act like they belong to someone else. Something grabbed my ankle. It wasn't gentle. It was a grab that remembered where tendons lived. The strength on that hold was ridiculous, like the person who had my foot had been waiting for that exact moment to pull. I tried to kick. My other hand slammed on the concrete. I clutched the banister and pulled myself up, and whatever had my ankle kept tugging. It dragged me 2 full steps backwards before I could wrench myself free. I don't know if he had a knife. I don't know what he intended. All I know is the weight of his hand on my leg and the panic in my chest. My breath was thin, knife-edge panic. I scrambled up the stairs and slammed the basement door shut behind me as hard as I could. I braced my body against it. The pounding started almost immediately. A hand, then 2 hands, then the sound of someone throwing their weight against wood. The door shook. The pounded rhythm was precise, like someone trying different angles, different places to test the hinges. I called 911 with my shoulder pressed to the door. I remember pinching the phone between my ear and my shoulder because my hands were shaking. The operator asked the questions like a script. "Where are you? Is anyone hurt?" The pounding kept going. At one point I heard a voice from behind the door say, "Open up." It wasn't a shout. It was a low, measured thing that carried a quiet threat. The police arrived and fanned out. They found a basement window slightly forced open, a hairline gap where a pane had been levered. Nothing was missing. My stereo, my laptop, the small things that would have been easy to take were untouched. That detail freaked me out more than the attempted entry. Why come into a house and not take anything? Why hide? Why not leave? Officers asked the questions I already knew the answers to. No, they didn't find the guy. No, there weren't obvious signs of how he got into the partitions beyond that window. Evidence took on a different kind of horror. A shoe print in mud outside that trailed into the yard and vanished. A smudge of drywall dust by the window, the police theorized. I tried to sleep while my ears waited for the sound of the door again. Months later, I put my stuff in a U-Haul and left. You don't need to be told to move after someone is in your home. Your body remembers the friction of those hands on your ankle. It remembers the way the door thudded with someone trying to break through. The house, which had been a warm place full of small victories like plants that didn't die and successful dinner experiments, felt like a skin you couldn't trust. The eviction of normalcy felt like saving my life from a slow poison. The aftermath never feels proportional. Police did what they could. They dusted, they took photos, they wrote a report that read like a legal document but had none of the actual answers. I moved out and slept for 3 months with my bedroom door closed and the lights on. The upstairs floor creaked in ways that made my stomach drop. I kept expecting to trip in the dark and find a hand. That wasn't closure, it was distance. And distance is often the only thing you can buy when the other alternatives feel too dangerous. You would think, after something like that, nothing else would be surprising. You would be wrong. I was 14, and I thought being alone in the house was like a VIP pass to being indestructible. Parents were out of state. My older sister had cancelled plans. I had the run of the place and the naive confidence only a 14-year-old can have. It was quiet in that way. An empty house is quiet, not restful, just thin and listening. I heard a tap on the siding. At first it could have been anything, a branch rubbing, a raccoon. The tapping moved. It had a trajectory that made the back of my neck prickle. It tapped along the house from one corner to another, like someone tracing a path. Then it migrated to the basement window. I crept toward the stairwell, phone in hand, flashlight app on. My thumb hovered over the camera button. With the house empty and my mind turned toward theater, I cracked the basement door and aimed the beam through the little gap. The light from my phone was a weak moon, but it was enough to catch shapes. I hit record. There was a figure standing beneath the basement window on the inside. Not outside. Beneath. Someone had somehow positioned themselves under the glass where no one should have been. The thing that made my stomach drop wasn't just the figure. It was the certainty that the person had been there for a while, standing so still they might as well be a stain on the wall. I whispered to myself, "What the hell?" And my voice echoed. The figure moved a fraction, turned. The outline was human enough to be terrifying. The grainy footage showed movement at the edge of the frame, the way a shadow can decide whether you're seen. I remember dialing my mother with fingers that wouldn't steady. She told me to call the police. She told me not to open the door. I called 911. The tapping at the window turned into banging at the basement door downstairs. The sound of the person trying to get in was sudden and heavy. It felt like someone testing a door for a while, then deciding force was quicker. The police came and swept the property. They found a knife missing from a rack in the little basement kitchenette, one of those cheap sets with magnets. It wasn't a big knife. It wasn't a chef's cleaver. But something that had been in the house was now gone. There were no prints, only smudges and the faint outline of a shoe on a dusty windowsill. What worries you isn't always the object. It's the implication. Someone had been inside while I was supposed to be alone. Someone had walked the rooms and not taken anything except one tool. Maybe they never meant to steal. Maybe they needed a utility. Maybe they were leaving a message. The police couldn't catch anyone, and the footage was too grainy to be actionable. The evidence sat like a loose tooth, visible, real, and about to fall out. People say sleep lulls after adrenaline. That night there was no sleep. My house felt smaller. I stopped leaving doors unlocked by accident. I stopped assuming no one would be inside when I returned home. Trust in your own sanctuary leaks away like water through a hairline crack. You start to notice things you didn't before. A wet footprint you assume is yours. The way the basement floor is colder near the door. Little details with the force of revelation. That small, grainy rectangle on my phone was proof that the lines between inside and outside can be crossed without fanfare. The police report filled pages and said very little. The missing knife was just another unsettled fact. If that was eerie, the next story felt like a betrayal of logic. At 16, a finished basement is where you go to be invincible. My friend and I would drag beanbags and a cheap futon down there. We'd play old games on a console and make jokes that sounded smarter under those yellow lights. The cat, Rocky, preferred the stairwell. He would scratch at the top of the door if he wanted to come down. Rocky had a thing about the basement that even then felt like knowledge. That night, Rocky was insistent. He paced, he scratched. He would normally curl up under the futon and tolerate our bad music, but this night he refused. He meowed at the stairs and pawed the door like something had been there and told him to stay out. We laughed it off at first. Teenagers do that. You make a joke out of your skin crawling to feel like you still have control. Then we started hearing noises from the storage rooms. The finished part of the basement was next to a bank of small doors behind which the builder had shoved the water heater and old paint cans. At first it was a rustle, then a thud. We told ourselves a raccoon had slipped in through the garage. Their foam football rolled out from under one of the storage doors and bounced into the room between a clatter of pipes and our boots. It was ordinary. It was stupid. It was proof that someone had been inside those compartments. The ball's sudden appearance turned the joke cold. We dragged our friend Malene upstairs. We locked the door and called the police. Officers searched the garage perimeter, pried at the storage doors, looked for forced entry. There were no pry marks on the exterior doors, no broken locks. There were no obvious footprints leading away and no sign that anyone had left through the usual exits. The house felt flushed with questions. What unsettled me forever was the impossible. How could someone have been in the storage rooms, moved around silently enough that we didn't hear footsteps until the ball rolled, and then left without opening a single outer door? The police checked for vents. They checked the crawl space. They checked windows. They left with the shrug of people who have seen the impossible so much it becomes background noise. The aftermath was quieter but more corrosive. People looked at each other differently. My parents started posting signs of distrust in the atmosphere. They locked the little utility doors in a way that made them look like they belonged in a war movie. Friends came over less. Rocky refused to be downstairs for weeks. The house regained a kind of function, but no one trusted the basement the same way again. Sometimes what haunts you isn't the physical evidence. It's the knowledge that the architecture you live in can harbor privacy violations that refuse to leave a trace. The foam football was like a footnote in a story you would rather not have started. It was mundane and therefore worse. If someone is inside your house and all they leave is a child's toy rolling on a concrete floor, then what else could they have done without a visible mark? And then there's the one that took the shape of a voice. When I was 9, I had a space in our family basement that was like a little bunker. No windows, heavy boiler, laundry machines that hummed in a way that muffled the world. The light switch was on the outside wall of the laundry room. You had to reach in to flip it on, and even then it was always dim. The darkness there wasn't empty. It had a feeling like a closed mouth. I was playing a game late in the afternoon, the kind of world-absorbing game that makes the laundry room feel like a different country. The stairs creaked, and then the laundry room door opened slightly. I heard the kind of noise a grown person makes when they're trying to be casual. A soft step, a shuffled foot. Then a voice that sounded like my mother called my name. The voice was low and croaked, like someone trying to pretend to be okay. I remember the hairs on my arms standing up. There was a strange comfort in thinking it was my mother. Maybe I'd been called for dinner. Little things like that are how the world keeps being sane. But the sound came from the boiler room, the dark slot beneath the machines where the light never seemed to reach. The laundry door was narrow, and when I pushed it open, the room was a rectangle of midnight. There was a silhouette. I couldn't make out features. It looked like a person. The figure was just standing there, not frantic, not trying to hide. I felt like my chest would split open with fear. My voice failed. I ran up the stairs and screamed for my parents. By the time they reached me, breathless and angry, the figure was gone. My father told me it was a friend of mine playing a prank. He looked annoyed, relieved. My mother hugged me like you hug away the story's sharp edges with perfume and firmness. Years later, when I was old enough to ask the questions and young enough to be dissatisfied with evasions, I looked into the family history. There was an aunt, Debbie. People said her name like it was a bruise. She died before I remembered, but there were hints. Unstable, trouble, kept at the edges. Obituary dates, a town 2 hours away. My parents' faces when I asked changed. They became small and careful, They told me a version of events that left things tidy but unsatisfying. They told me that Debbie had been mentally ill, that she had spent time in institutions, that she had disappeared before I was born. They told me she wouldn't have hurt a child, but my memory has a stubborn way of not fitting with tidy explanations. The voice in the boiler room sounded like my mother. The silhouette felt deliberate. Did Debbie move in circles around our house? Did she ever have access? Were the shapes in the dark family secrets? The questions multiplied. My family chose to protect certain facts, or maybe they didn't even know what to tell me without making the past too heavy. Either way, the laundry room remained a vessel for an answer that never came. I went back when I was older, standing at the threshold of that door. The boiler still hummed. The light was the same inadequate yellow. I pressed my hand against the lint trap. There was a residual smell of oil and old fabric. It had the faint suggestion of a person who had once used the room for more than folding and storage. But a smell is not testimony. Memories are not evidence. They are bones you pick at until irritation becomes obsession. I never learned what stood there that day. The silhouette, the voice, the later record of a troubled aunt, everything is ambivalent. It sits inside the memory like a key that could fit a dozen locks. My parents' evasions look like armor meant to keep children safe. Or maybe they were covering something they couldn't face admitting. Either is plausible, and both are unsettling. You might notice a pattern now. Basements normalize secrecy. Their low ceilings and hidden nooks give people ideas about privacy, about shelter, about staying unseen. They are the kind of places a house forgets when it is trying to be tidy. What connects these four stories is less the identity of the intruders and more the weird intimacy of the space. Someone standing under a basement window, someone crouched behind a folding table, a foam ball rolling out as proof of presence, a voice in a boiler room that sounds like someone you love. Each of these things intrudes on the private architecture of home. They take what you think is personal and make it public in the most unsettling way. There are no clean endings. The police come, they take notes, they stop coming one day. Evidence exists, like the phone footage, the missing knife, the pounded basement door, the little foam football. But evidence does not mean answers. The folding table, the partitioned layout, the windows that should keep weather in and strangers out, those are the props. The real terror is the knowledge that someone has occupied your domestic geography without your permission. I still think about the ankle grab. I still watch the corner of every basement when I walk past. When I go into a house with a finished lower level, I look for the little doors, the cupboard where someone could crouch and breathe. The voice that sounds like your mother is the worst because it confuses safety with threat. You can't sleep easy knowing that the sounds you trust can be used to lure you into danger. Maybe these stories will make you check the bottom of your stairs tonight. Maybe they won't. Either way, basements hold things. They preserve history. Sometimes they preserve bad decisions. Sometimes they hold people who never meant to be found. And sometimes they hold family truths that are sticky and shameful and resistant to daylight. If you've ever heard something in your basement at 2 in the morning, you know the way your imagination races. Not toward the logical, but toward the worst-case whispers. You listen for the creak that proves you're not alone. You wait for the footstep that will tell you whether to run. And then you tell yourself you're being irrational, because the world needs some balance and because fear demands it. I don't have answers. I have the pounded door, the missing knife, the grainy video, the foam football, the silhouette in the laundry room, Aunt Debbie's name on a line in an obituary. I have a string of memories that knot my life. They tightened around me in small ways. Decisions to move, sudden distrust, a house that felt too exposed. My life changed in practical terms and in subtler ones. I stopped leaving the basement light on for convenience. I started keeping the stairs clear so I could move faster. I watched the corners of rooms as if they were painted with the possibility of danger. If there is any comfort in these stories, it's that you're not alone in noticing the oddness of your house at night. Basements are a particular kind of stage for fear because they're domestic, close, and supposedly harmless. They are also liminal, the space between the inhabited and the mechanical, between public family life and private storage. That threshold allows weirdness to grow. So now I leave you with this. Basements collect things. Not just boxes and old holiday decorations, but the residue of small, inexplicable moments. They keep the noise you think you heard at 2 in the morning. They preserve the way a stranger might stand under a window and decide to stay. They hold silhouettes that can't be explained decades later. They are the part of your house that remembers what you would rather forget. If any of this hit close to home, literally or figuratively, tell us in the comments. Share your basement story, your own late-night noise, the thing that made you sleep with the light on. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stay careful and maybe, just maybe, leave that basement light on.